Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. When I was trying to get a bit inspired for today's talk, I picked 3 quotes. And it might kind of set the right context for some of the topics I'll cover in my discussion. The first quote is by a very well-known Thomas Edison, who, as fellow inventors, I think most of us can relate, but I'll come back to it later on. And the next 2 quotes are by, forgive me, management gurus, Peter Drucker and Simon Sinek. So with respect to Simon's quote, I don't know if you can read it, it says, "Pure pragmatism can't imagine a bold future. Pure idealism can't get anything done." So the 3 topics I'm going to cover today are technology, what BASF, as the world's largest chemical company, is working on, in particular delving in a bit into renewable raw materials, bio-based raw materials, a few examples. That's kind of what we're doing today. Then I'll talk about the role of venture capital. What is venture capital? Venture capital might be on your radar at some point in the future. And very briefly, venture capitalists invest in companies, not in just the innovation and not in just the project. So I'll get there and I'll have a light touch on that. So who are we? BASF's the world's largest chemical company. I have about 100,000 colleagues, so every time I come to one of these events, they say, "I know one of your colleagues." I usually ask for the name. We do a bit with UBC, not a ton. From a research side, maybe we can do more. At a high level, we have 6 major product areas, many of which could benefit, I think, from bioproducts. Certainly from an inputs perspective, for example, petrochemicals, intermediates, monomers, engineered plastics. BASF is also the largest partner to the automotive sector from a materials side globally, and we can talk about the inside of the car, the outside of the car. Additionally, home and personal care, another major segment, if you will, that has, let's say, a consumer pull for cosmetics or for home and personal care chemicals. And happy to elaborate what we might be doing there with respect to coconut oil or palm oil, not just tracking and tracing, but obviously alternatives. Additionally, agricultural solutions, I'd be remiss to not mention that a mainstay, not just of BASF as a company, but of our venture activities is in the agricultural sector, be it for the food chain or as inputs. I'll keep going. This is a bit of a fuzzy chart, so my apologies if you can't read it really well. The backdrop of, I think, why all of us are doing what we're doing is the path to climate neutrality. That's the backdrop. What are we doing as a large company with 250 sites globally? We have 3 major levers to achieve our path to net zero. 2030 is an interim milestone year for many corporates worldwide, and I think we're on a good track there to reduce GHG by a modest amount, 25% from 2018 to 2030. And I'll talk briefly about the 3 levers. The title kind of cut off, but the 3 levers for us are renewable energy, CO2 mitigation, and circular economy. So I'll delve a bit more into the second and third one. The first one is probably a bit obvious, where we're sourcing wind and solar wherever we can, and then CO2 mitigation, et cetera. On the right-hand side, it's a bit of a small text. It's around product carbon footprint. So BASF has actually 60,000 plus products in the market in many of the sectors I talked about earlier. We are publishing the product carbon footprint of these products, and in doing so, and being a European company, we actually have set ourselves scope 3 targets. So this is kind of the backdrop. If you're a company selling products in the market, you have your own emissions to measure, scope 1, 2, if you will, and then scope 3 is a bit progressive, but it's coming around the corner, meaning we do need to work with the supply chain and inputs and feedstock providers and the customers until disposal and be able to measure with confidence a lot of the emissions coming up and down the value chain. And that's where recycled raw materials, renewable waste-based raw materials may play a significant role. And in our case, that might include castor oil, biomethane, pyrolysis oil, and the like. And sorry for the title, it's very, very large, but at a high level, I'm going to dig a bit into circular economy, which is our 3rd lever to achieve net zero. If you recall, the first one is renewable energies, the second one is CO2 mitigation, that would be like carbon capture as an example, and then the 3rd one is circular economy. So within circular economy, you'd have like recycled feedstock and renewable feedstock. So I'll start with what we're kind of doing now, and then we'll get into venture capital and potentially research what really we should be doing to have more step change in the future. So around recycled feedstock, mechanical recycling, largely of, let's just say, plastics, is available today. There are some improvements going on, and that's a lower hanging fruit. The next step, which is a little bit more difficult economic-wise, but it's happening, is chemical recycling. We have an investment in a Swiss-based company called Depoly, depolymerization of PET as an example, and pyrolysis oil could be the feedstock to our value chain. So I'll show that in a second. Coming a little bit closer to this audience on the left side would be the renewable feedstocks. So renewable feedstocks for us is a bit twofold. There's the biomass balance opportunity, which I'll talk about with two examples. I'll talk about that with cosmetics, and I'll also talk about that with, let's just say, packaging. And then there's the dedicated bio-based production, which we're working on quite extensively with our PBAT business today. So I would say a pragmatic interim approach that you'll hear from industry is called mass balance, biomass balance, right? I'll talk about venture capital next because we need to be looking well beyond interim. Renewable feedstock. So today we're purchasing 1 million metric tons of renewable raw materials that goes into what we call the Verbund value chain. So if you're interested, I can obviously share the slides, and we'll get into the visual in a second. I don't want to block the screen here. So without going into too much detail, but at the front end of most chemical processes, you have the feedstocks, and to the extent there's an opportunity, we would replace a percentage, or sometimes in some cases all, of that feedstock for any end product with a bio alternative to initiate that chemical process. In some cases of our larger sites, that could be bio-naphtha or biomethane. So part of the feedstock in today's practical approach, so it's already happening today, biomass balance, it's replaced with renewable feedstocks. Most of those are based on vegetable oils, fats, sugars, and woods and grains. Then we would want to make sure that there is certification not just of the feedstock itself through third-party methodologies, but also attribution of the use of those feedstocks so that your actual end product can be X%, ideally up to 100% in some cases, bio-based. My home and personal care example is at the bottom, where a few examples would be we're expanding our supplier base for RSPO certified palm oil, but also for world's first chemical company to offer fully certified cosmetics ingredients based on coconut oil, and we launched the Sustainable Castor Oil Initiative back in 2016. Second example would be a little bit more the packaging value chain, where we have a PBAT product, and the most, let's say, 100% attributed product offers a product carbon footprint of 60% lower than the base resin. So that's having multiple feedstock options. And so that's our EcoFlex product. So in conclusion, we have this is a typical circular plastics value chain as an example. There are different ones, and then where possible, replace the steam cracker input with bio product, and you'll have the normal and sometimes attributed value chain, and then end products, and where maybe an EcoFlex product, for example, could fit in is really to close the loop back, and some would go towards agriculture, the compostable, and some biomethane would go back in. Okay? In case you don't know, BASF also has biotech R&D, and there might be an opportunity to work with us. We have 50 experts sitting in San Diego alone. And like I said, we do some work, but not a ton, with UBC. Also, you may or may not know the HALO platform. I think we've published over 17 challenges on HALO already, so get connected with us from a researcher's perspective. Happy to discuss this further or make the right connections internally. Let me just do a quick time check. Okay. Now we're shifting on to the disruption in the future. So I briefly talked about what is largely underway today to achieve, let's just say, our first milestone towards net zero of 2030. But what is venture capital? And I think what is also the role of research? It's really those disruptive catalyzing changes that sometimes take longer to put into place. So that's the vision of a corporate venture fund like like BASF Venture Capital. Without blocking the text, I'm going to move over here. Macro trends we are monitoring. Why am I mentioning generative AI to this audience? If at some point in the future you have a spin out from your research and you create a company, you're going to get money, it's good to be aware of who is competing for the same money from those investors. And that's why I show macro trends here. The first one being the rise of generative AI and the role of both machine learning and AI, even in your own research. This is a heavily funded area that not only we expect those tools to be used where they can be, but also some of the forefront companies are getting funding from the exact same VCs that might be funding bio-based materials. I'll keep going. We talked about energy transition, but it goes without saying our CO2 mitigation strategy, which I mentioned earlier. There are potentials to also make venture investments in this space. One of our portfolio companies is fairly well known in the CCU space called LanzaTech. They're fairly well known. We're an investor in LanzaTech, which is gas fermentation, CO2 to ethanol and ethylene. We also have energy storage long duration investment in ESS, which is just in Oregon. Geopolitics, critical metals. Our only Canadian investment is PH7 sitting here in BC. We don't actually have another Canadian portfolio company yet in our portfolio, but everything critical metals is, number one, competing for the same dollars, but secondly, there's a big geopolitical element there, and of course, Canada wants to participate heavily in this role. I won't go through all of them, but the last one is highly relevant, I think, to this audience, and you should be aware. There has been difficulties in biomanufacturing that really persist. So there's headwinds when you're talking to investors in a couple of years from now, learnings from the past where scale-up risks have really stopped the go-to-market, or the reverse, the market's not ready. So that's where the original Thomas Edison quote I thought of came up. I think it's relevant to this audience to be aware, and I always encourage anyone at any stage is think about who would buy this at the end of the day and talk to them as early as possible. Okay? So for us as a VC fund, we seek startups with global potential to disrupt the chemical industry. I'm not going to read the whole list of technology, but I touched on a few of them earlier. Certainly industrial biotech is up there, but we will look at economics because VCs do look at financial return, and corporate VCs do as well. Right? So I think the more the scale up is thought through, or the right partners or hires are eventually brought into the team, I think the better, especially in that particular space. I spoke to some of our example portfolio companies, PH7 in Burnaby. Depoly is depolymerization of PET down to the monomer. Boda Bio is an industrial biotech platform out of California and China. We're also an investor in Boda Bio as a reference. I also spoke to LanzaTech already, quite a marquee investment of BASF. They've since gone public, but nonetheless, it goes without saying some of these scale-ups do require a lot of capital and a lot of expertise over time. So I would just learn from those to the extent, no matter what stage you're at. Thank you.